Hello and welcome to another standard video. Today we're checking out the latest iteration of the blue-white artifact deck. Of course, the centerpiece is still Simulacrum Synthesizer, scrying 2 when it enters, and whenever another artifact we control with mana value 3 or greater enters, we get to make a construct token that grows with the number of artifacts we control. So that's our eventual win condition, and this deck is very good at finding Synthesizer and triggering it a whole bunch, and the best way to do so is with United Battlefront, a 4-mana sorcery similar to Collected Company, but instead of finding creatures, we can find non-creature, non-land permanents with mana value 3 or less from among the top 7 cards of our library and put 2 of those on the battlefield for free. So that can potentially find Synthesizer alongside a bevy of other 3-mana artifacts, which in turn can immediately trigger Synthesizer to start making those constructs. And one of the exciting new additions from Edge of Eternities that finds its way into the deck is Pinnacle Starcage, a 3-mana artifact. When it enters, we get to exile all artifact and creature cards with mana value 2 or less until it leaves the battlefield. You can also potentially activate it for 8 mana to make a bunch of 2/2 robot tokens, but that's not going to come up very often. So Starcage has pretty much replaced Temporary Lockdown in a lot of decks after rotation, since Temporary Lockdown rotated out, and Lockdown was sometimes even played in these blue-white artifact decks, despite not being an artifact itself. Now we get to play with Starcage. The main difference is that it doesn't exile cheap enchantments, which we could maybe hit with a lockdown, but of course the big upgrade is that Starcage is an artifact, so it can also trigger Simulacrum Synthesizer, and if we were to find both with United Battlefront, then we can also make sure to first resolve the Starcage and then make our artifact token, so we'll still have the construct token as a leftover, so that's also very important. Also, if you play the Starcage, you can also first make sure to exile the board and then get the token from Synthesizer, so the token doesn't get swept up. And then another card that plays very well with Pinnacle Starcage is the Cryogen Relic, a 2-mana artifact. When it enters or leaves the battlefield, we draw a card. So even if it gets exiled by our own Starcage, we still get to draw a replacement card. Can also sacrifice it ourselves to put a stun counter on up to 1 target tapped creature, but usually we're just going to play it, draw a card, and then it also counts as a 2-mana artifact. We can potentially sacrifice to Repurposing Bay, which can find now a 3-mana artifact if we sacrifice the 2-drop, and put that straight onto the battlefield. So that's another way we can reliably find Simulacrum Synthesizer, or maybe some additional interaction if we need it instead to keep the opponent's game plan under control. And then rounding out the deck, we've got the Clay-Fired Bricks, which will gain 2 life and find a plains when it enters, and then yet another 2-mana artifact we're happy to sacrifice, and not a disaster if we exile it to our own Starcage. And then the Sawblades gives us some more removal, dealing 5 to a tapped creature, can play it at instant speed thanks to Flash, and then we can also upgrade it into a 3-drop using our Repurposing Bay, and it's also not too bad if it gets exiled by the Starcage. Maybe we end up sacrificing our own Starcage at a later point, and then we get the Sawblades back a second time, and that's also very synergistic with the Relic, as we got to draw a card when it entered, 1 more when it left, exiled by our own Starcage, and then maybe we get to draw again once we sacrifice Starcage and bring the Relic back. Just need to make sure we have enough answers to the opponent's permanents that they get back. And then at 3 mana we also have Perilous Snare, which can just exile any opposing non-land permanent. Can also maybe increase our speed to start putting counters on our creatures, but usually this deck deals damage in chunks of 10 or 20 damage, so if we're attacking, we're usually getting the game over within 1 or 2 attacks, so that's unlikely to come up. We also have Braided Net as another flexible answer, enters with 3 net counters and can tap remove a net counter to tap another target non-land permanent. Its activated abilities also cannot be activated for as long as it remains tapped, so this can shut down opposing planeswalkers even, can activate it in the opponent's upkeep before they get a chance to activate them, and can also maybe tap down hasty creatures, which we can otherwise maybe struggle to answer outside of the Sawblades with Flash. But against creatures like Screaming Nemesis, where you don't want to deal 5 damage to it, Braided Net is going to be a much better solution. And then we can eventually craft with Artifact, usually have an artifact in the graveyard we can use for it, and then get the Braided Kipu, and then Braided Kipu entering the battlefield through the craft with Artifact mechanic also counts as another 3-mana artifact entering the battlefield, which will once again trigger Simulacrum Synthesizer, and then the Kipu can be activated for 4 mana to draw cards equal to the number of artifacts we control, so that can also be pretty nice in grindier matchups. And then we can also eventually sacrifice a 3-mana artifact to Repurposing Bay, and you might have already spotted the one-off Fire Crystal, which kind of stands out like a sore thumb in this deck. Since we don't really have the means to hardcast it, we can technically get there if we control 2 copies of Starting Town to make a red mana, but usually we want to avoid drawing the Fire Crystal and just search it up with the Repurposing Bay. It's another 4-mana artifact, so it also triggers Simulacrum Synthesizer, and more importantly, creatures we control have haste. So in addition to maybe generating a few artifact tokens, they can now also immediately attack, so that can also present lethal out of nowhere, especially useful against other control decks where they might have lots of sorcery speed board wipes to keep your constructs in check. Now if they have haste, we can immediately attack and get the game over with. And then the mana base, as we mentioned, has access to Starting Town, entering untapped early on, and then can make colored mana at the cost of 1 life. Still have Meticulous Archive, surveilling 1 when it enters tapped, and the Flood Farm Verge, which is also quite good with the Archive and our various basic lands. Now we did end up losing a couple blue-white dual lands with rotation, so the mana base has taken a bit of a hit. We don't have access to Hallowed Fountain yet, so that's still one of the shock lands that's not back in Standard, but I'm also trying out some of the new planets, which are pretty synergistic with the large constructs we get from Synthesizer, as we can potentially tap those tokens when they wouldn't have haste, and then station the Windswept Bastion, which can eventually start making copies of various artifacts and enchantments, so that's also quite good with our Synthesizer, for instance. And then Utheros, a Titanic God Core, the blue planet, also enters tapped, and once stationed at 12 or more counters, we can turn it into a Tolarian Academy pretty much, making a blue mana for each artifact we control, so that can also give us a nice mana boost. And then our final utility land is Fomori Vault, which is also a decent mana sink, can discard a card, and then go find some of our more exciting curve toppers like United Battlefront or Simulacrum Synthesizer. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw with a keepable hand. No new cards yet, but the bricks can find a plains, which casts any of our 3-drops. Probably starting with a Synthesizer. Opponent blue-black. So some sort of Dimir mid-range deck. If they're packing counter spells and discard, could be tough. It's a Maze Mind Tome, so it might be more of a control deck. Well, blue-black isn't known for destroying artifacts, so if we can resolve Synthesizer, that could take over. But they might keep up a counterspell next turn, we'll see. In the meantime, we drew a couple more bricks. Not exactly the card we want, but can always sacrifice it to a Repurposing Bay to get additional Synthesizers. Their opponent's got 3 mana up. Will they simply pass a turn? They do. So I'll play a Braided Net, which is a card I least care about resolving. Both Repurposing Bay and Synthesizer would be more valuable, but we can still get it out there. And maybe our opponent feels inclined to tap out. If not, we can always play a pair of 2-drops. So we're not gonna have to worry about hitting our land drops going forward. Can maybe pay for a conditional counterspell. And the Braided Net can also craft into the Kipu, which can draw more cards. Alright, opponent with a River Regent drawing and discarding. So we'll see if it's maybe more of a Reanimator deck, based on what they discard. Just a land. So yeah, it looks like blue-black control. Now what we don't want to have happen is opponent counters Synthesizer and then has a cover-up to extract it out of our deck, which could happen, although currently they're gonna struggle to collect evidence. So, could activate Braided Net, forcing them to use Maze Mind Tome potentially. Okay. And then now maybe start with Repurposing Bay. Although, I guess Repurposing Bay is actually more valuable than Synthesizer in this spot, because it can get multiple Synthesizers. And does it resolve? It does not. So 3 steps ahead, a hard counter. But it's also only 1 mana in their graveyard for collect evidence purposes. So opponent unable to use the tome end of turn now. And that's gonna stock up. So once again, I'm probably going to use Braided Net on the tome, but maybe they play second tome and then it doesn't matter as much. So we'll let that resolve. And yeah, hope they don't have another counter for Repurposing Bay, since our draws have not been particularly exciting. I want to find United Battlefronts, more Synthesizers and Repurposing Bays. Last turn could have also decided to craft with Artifact, which I guess is a way of exiling Synthesizer out of our graveyard, so we don't need to worry about cover up as much. So yeah, if they counter the Bay, I'm gonna be interested in maybe transforming the net so that can draw more cards. But I had to play the land first last turn, in case they had a Phantom Interference, counter unless you pay 2. I guess they could also be running the Exhale, the blue one, which is also counter unless you pay 2, unless they have a dragon to reveal, which is not guaranteed. So, usually against blue-black, try and cast your spells with 2 additional mana available when possible. Alright, so opponent's got a lot of cards in hand. They've got 3 mana available for another counter potentially. Activate on Tome. And a Fomori Vault is a good one. So I'll start with Bay. See if that resolves. It does. Alright, that's awesome. So now I can activate. Still only 4 mana values in graveyard. So I don't expect them to have collect evidence next turn, but it could happen. But yeah, we'll get a Synthesizer. And find another one. And I can play a tapped starting town now. Okay, so we finally get things going. Opponent stocks up again, but they wouldn't have the mana to cast a cover-up afterwards. But yeah, they might be working up towards their own combo. Maybe they want to mill us to death. They are playing the end, so yeah, cover-up seems likely. So no shortage of cards in hand. Activate on Tome again, since I'm likely to transform the Braided Net. Now, something interesting we can also do is sacrifice Net to the Bay to get our Fire Crystal to give the team haste. Which, you know, if this resolves, may be worth it. Especially for close to threatening lethal with it. Opponent counters again. So then I'll get the last Synthesizer. And then I don't care too much about our opponent extracting Synthesizers since we have all the ones in play already. So I can activate Repurposing Bay and get Synthesizer number 4. And then a Relic is fine. And then I can transform Braided Net now. Which does trigger Synthesizer again. Could have saved that for next turn to once again combine with Fire Crystal. But yeah, for opponent wipes the board here, it's not a disaster. And there's a deadly cover-up. And yeah, it doesn't matter too much if the one Synthesizer is gone. Opponent goes for the bricks instead. One of those left in the deck, I believe. And they get to see the Fire Crystal, which is relevant. Although it's not like they can do much about it. So that also shuffled my deck, so we're no longer drawing the 2-drop, or I guess we are. So that was lucky, can play it, and probably tapping a Plains. Draw card, can still activate Kipu for 4 mana if we'd like. Or I can sack a relic to Repurposing Bay, get another Repurposing Bay. Draw a card in the process. Trigger Synthesizer. And then Repurposing Bay. Could sack Repurposing Bay to get Fire Crystal. Which triggers Synthesizer 2 more times. Our tokens have haste. So they seem pretty dead, even with 1 spot removal spell. Can also flash in the Saw Blades just to add another artifact to the board. Shoot the Sheriff, that's fine. And our opponent explodes, so yeah, seeing the value of Fire Crystal against control. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a pretty unexciting hand, so we can cast a couple of relics to draw. We've got a little bit of removal, but yeah, no excitement at the top end, really. No Synthesizers, Battlefronts, which are kind of the cards we want. And with only 2 lands, things could have gotten awkward as well. This is a pretty similar hand, all things considered, but I'm more inclined to keep just because we also get to Surveil for starters, which helps. And then I have to decide if we keep Snare, Cage, or Braided Net, because I'm pretty happy with both 2-drops. Cage with Relic is also a combo, so that probably wants to stay. And then Snare versus Braided Net. Braided Net can eventually draw cards as well, if we don't hit anything exciting. Yeah, I guess since we already have 2 removal spells, keep the Plains on top. Opponent red-green. So not entirely sure what they're trying to set up. Could be kind of the pirate skeleton graveyard deck, which wants multiple merfolks, pirates, etc. to exile from the graveyard. Probably a bit of a far-fetched guess, but you could play it as a red-green deck, technically. Fear of missing out now. Also discard Outlet. Discards a Braid. So it might just be kind of a red-green Delirium deck, which would also make sense. Surprised they didn't keep the Abrade, since that answers Synthesizer, so they might already have one in hand. And now, I guess Dark Age is reasonable, even though we could keep it in hand a little bit longer. And for now just play another Relic, so we can exile both Relics next turn. And draw 2 more cards. And then if they try to Abrade this Dark Age, we would draw 2 cards again. Tiny chance we could have died to Fear of Missing Out. If they get to Delirium, can give it double strike and bump it up. Now Breakout. Finds a Scout. So Dark Age is looking good. Even though they can hit us for 5. So we'll start there. Might draw into another tap land. And we did. Alright, still need to try and find a win condition, although repurposing base sacking Saw Blades can get a Synthesizer. Now the Wicker Folk has Delirium, so can immediately attack for 4. So we could play defense for a turn with Saw Blades and Braided Net. Opponent has the double strike trick, so that's 10 damage. Ouch. And a Beastie. Alright, that's pretty scary. So I probably have to go Braided Net plus Saw Blades this turn, And yeah, we can Saw Blades now. We could wait for them to attack. I don't know if they're running hexproof tricks that I need to worry about. So I might be fine just going Braided Net Pass. Because I might be better off using Saw Blades on the Beastie and tapping down the Wicker Folk, because Beastie provides value by milling a card each turn, and presumably we would keep the Wicker Folk tapped down for the foreseeable future anyway. So tap down Wicker Folk. That works. Beastie attacks. No blocks. Just wanted to see if they wanted to fire off another pump spell. And then we can Saw Blades. Curator can exile stuff from graveyards. But I can get another Starcage if I'd like, which is probably the play, because that would keep me safe against another haste creature as I would have Braided Net available. And then I can even play a tap land. Because if I get Synthesizer, we could still die next turn. And then after we search our library and shuffle, we can still surveil, looking for United Battlefront, Synthesizer. Saw Blades, I guess, is fine. It can upgrade into a 3-drop with our Repurposing Bay, so it's not the worst. Screaming Nemesis, that one's pretty terrifying. Now luckily Braided Net is the perfect answer, since we don't need to deal damage to it, but I'm not going to want to use the Saw Blades, because then we just die. To target tapped creature and opponent control, so I can't even play this now, I guess. Unless we first step down the Scout, then I can Saw Blades the Scout. Because yeah, this doesn't say up to one target creature, so I would be forced to damage the Nemesis, which is incredibly awkward. But yeah, what happens now? I use Braided Net. Answer Scout. And then I probably need to Repurposing Bay and get an answer for Screaming Nemesis, which once again means we're not getting a win condition. Yeah, I guess that's still the play. Anything else I can do? We can also set up the Kipu, even though that would be a good way to potentially trigger Synthesizer if it's in play. But I think I just got a Perilous Snare here. And then yeah, I gotta transform Braided Net since we're out of counters, and then next turn I can draw a bunch with it. Hoping that it's not too late. So one unknown in hand. A Beastie. Alright, so step 1, activate Kipu, that's 4 mana. Get to draw a bunch of cards, and then we can still activate Repurposing Bay. Alright, so we pretty much found what we were looking for. I can play Clayfired Bricks, gain 2. Although even at 7 we could still die to the Double Strike trick. So then, is there a safer line available? Yeah, I mean, I guess I can just Bricks, get another Perilous Snare just for the Beastie, and then next turn we can Synthesizer and go off. That seems fine. Could also get another Starcage, doesn't matter too much. Maybe best to keep Starcage available. Alright, and then next turn we can finally start making tokens, as our opponent drew another Beastie. But yeah, I think we've turned the corner. And there's even a chance I can present lethal right now. since we can tutor up a fire crystal. So play another synthesizer, make 1 token, and yeah, opponent scoops it up. But yeah, I could repurposing Bay, get fire crystals, sacking. I guess I would have to sacrifice one of my 3-drops, ideally not a synthesizer, so we can make 2 more tokens. But then I would have 3 creatures that are all quite large, threatening lethal. So could afford to maybe give them back a beastie, although then they could chump, maybe still survive, depending on how big the tokens are. And then if they top deck the double strike trick, I could die on the way back. So maybe Fire Crystal isn't quite the play here, but yeah, we should be safe enough at 7 with some large blockers, and then next turn it should be trivial to cross the finish line. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a keepable hand. We can maybe showcase the new planet. Or I can surveil, because I might want to dig for 2-mana interaction facing black-white, so it could be a Sephiroth sacrifice deck with Erase the Past. Which can be a tough matchup if we don't find the Stark Age to interact. As we see an early Voice of Victory. Okay, I got Clayfire Bricks, which I can deploy now. And then Synthesizer into Battlefront, hoping to find Stark Age, pretty much. Could also consider Braided Net to tap down the Voice. But the Scry 2 from Synthesizer also gives us a better chance of finding what we're looking for. So there's the Blood Witch. They might have a Corrupted Conviction as well. Yep. Sack a token, draw 2. The other token also gets sacrificed. Drains for 1. So opponent is off to a good start. And then Repurposing Bay. I could keep as a second card down so that I'm guaranteed to hit it with Battlefront. Or I could just draw it, and then next turn Battlefront, turn after Repurposing Bay activate, can at the very least sack the bricks to get another 3-drop like Stark Age. Yeah, that's maybe better, because I don't really want to draw another land, which is what we would need to do to set that up. So opponent doesn't have a very full graveyard yet for Raise the Past. But if they have Sephiroth here, that could hurt. Servondam with a Zealot, so yeah, that was a powerful 1-2 punch. As they can now grow Servondam and use it to blow up any of my permanents, including a Stark Age. So that can also trigger when exiled, but of course with a sack outlet they can sacrifice it at will. And now Zealot's gonna fill the graveyard. So yeah, Servondam is probably the most important card in this matchup, just because it lines up favorably against Stark Age. So there's probably no point in trying to find Stark Age anymore. I mean, I guess it still forces them to use Servondam, so it's not a complete waste of time. So it might still be worth it. Possible they decide to blow up the Synthesizer in response. They don't. Found Stark Age and another Synthesizer, so that's probably what we want. So make sure to Stark Age first, and then make a bunch of tokens. Opponent can also sacrifice their entire board to set up Erase the Past. But yeah, with Servondam they could have decided to just blow up the Stark Age itself. So this must mean that they have Erase the Past in hand already. Their opponent gets rid of the Stark Age, so they can keep the rest in play. We're at 9, and then we get to make a bunch of tokens. And then, yeah, next turn the play is probably Repurposing Bay, get Fire Crystal. So we want to avoid drawing the Fire Crystal. So maybe drawing Perilous Snare is fine then. If I did have Bastion in play, I could have immediately gotten it to 12 counters, which then next turn could have copied Synthesizer. Yeah, there's Erase the Past with double Blood Witch in the graveyard, which they surveilled in the meantime, so that's just lethal here. GG's. Yeah. I guess even without Servondam, just because they had Zealot to sacrifice their board, they would have been fine, as they would have been able to put all those cards in the graveyard. So yeah. Opponent's got lethal on board, just sacrifice 4 random creatures, and Blood Witch will do the rest. But you can imagine this game without a Zealot on the battlefield, then Starcage maybe manages to exile a bunch of creatures, and then if next turn we do get a Fire Crystal, we're attacking for a ton of damage. But then again, our opponent can also chum block some huge construct tokens while maybe draining with a Blood Witch at the same time. So I think the matchup is pretty balanced overall, just kinda depends how the draws line up, and could potentially still be improved even further for the blue-white deck by including cards like Authority of the Consuls or Rest in Peace, which we can also hit with United Battlefront, but of course they're not particularly synergistic with the artifact theme. Okay, we're on the draw with a pretty poor hand, only 1 land. That's not gonna cut it. This is not a huge improvement if we can't hit our 3rd land drop. If we can, then this is probably pretty good. And then, yeah, maybe a 2nd Battlefront is overkill, or I could bottom Repurposing Bay. But yeah, if we can cast Synthesizer, I'm pretty likely to hit land 4 with a Scry 2. So then we may as well go big. This could be a mirror match, it looks like it. Alright, land is perfect. And I'll keep another one on top. So now Synthesizer could also try and keep some 3-mana artifacts on top to set up Battlefront. Our opponent just sacking the relics, so maybe they were about to miss a land drop. Authority is somewhat effective at slowing us down, especially once Fire Crystal's involved. But for now we'll play Synth, force them to remove it. And then, yeah, this would be kind of a good sequence. Draw the land, and then hit Synthesizer with Battlefront. Assuming they don't remove Synthesizer first. Opponent has a Perilous Snare. Now I can just Perilous Snare back. But I also don't mind going for Battlefront, which might be able to do both, since we know about Synthesizer, and there's Perilous Snare. So that's ideal. So we can exile the Snare. Eventually we can also get rid of Authority. And then another Synthesizer, another planet. Yeah, I mean, that seems fine. So we can set up another Battlefront. Opponent's got some catching up to do. Starcage exiles our tokens. Does not exile enchantments, so Authority is safe. But we can Battlefront again. Hitting Repurposing Bay and Synthesizer. And then Repurposing Bay can get Fire Crystal after we exile Authority with Perilous Snare. Now I guess Authority did mean that we don't get to station any of our planets. Otherwise we could have easily gotten enough counters on them. Opponent's got another Starcage. But yeah, they're just playing defense, they don't have their own threats. So, can just Battlefront one more time. Or, let's see, Perilous Snare, Authority, and then get Fire Crystal. Could be lethal. So make sure to resolve Snare first, so my tokens enter untapped. and then sack a 3-drop, which one makes sense. Could even give them authority back temporarily, since we have enough untapped creatures that can attack, but could have also sacked the synthesizer, and that's game. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a keepable hand, even if it's maybe missing something exciting like synthesizer or battlefront. Opponent must be a green landfall deck with escape tunnel. Cards like Tifa. So it's good that we have some interaction. For now, play a tap land. And there's Bristly Bill. Yeah, this should be an okay matchup for us, since we have cards like Star Cage, which also ignore most hexproof tricks they can have to protect their creatures. And then our win condition involves putting some very large tokens on the battlefield, which can soak up an attack. But if our opponent's got a particularly fast start, maybe with a Lanor Elves, and we don't have some of these removal spells, they could get a quick turn 3 or 4 kill. So Bill getting value before attacking, which also plays around the Saw Blades. Could also decide to just take it and play Star Cage next turn. Opponent doesn't have to attack, since they probably know we have Saw Blades in hand. Yeah, I think I still cast the Saw Blades, or do I? Nah, maybe I should take it. Keep Saw Blades for a future threat. 3 is not that much in the grand scheme of things. So we can clean up for now. And then next turn goes straight to United Battlefront, unless our opponent plays Tifa, then we might have to respect the combo kill. And then I might be better off just answering it. Mossborn Hydra, also kind of part of that list. So yeah, maybe we Perilous Snare, which is making use of our mana a bit better. And then next turn I can both keep up Saw Blades and play Repurposing Bay, or we can Repurposing Bay activate. Although there's nothing I really want to sacrifice at the moment. Chocobo is a bit more manageable. Braided Net also very useful. But yeah, now it's probably time for Battlefronts. So we'll start there. And then we can still maybe station. So found Synthesizer and another Perilous Snare. Could also go for Star Cage, which plays around a protection spell. But maybe we're fine with baiting out a protection spell. Now let's still go for Star Cage. Just gotta stack the triggers correctly. First exile, then make a token. It doesn't put them in the right order by itself, so you gotta adjust it. And then great to put Fire Crystal on the bottom, since we definitely don't want to draw it. Okay, and then we can station no haste creatures out of the landfall deck that we need to worry about. And our opponent scoops it up. Yeah, just too far behind here. We had all the answers. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a keepable hand. Got a mix of interaction with the Saw Blades and Braided Nets. A win condition. Drawing Fire Crystal always feels bad, but it was bound to happen at some point. So now we can't get it with our Repurposing Bay. Opponent looks to be mono red aggro. For now I can just Saw Blades. Could have let them untap. Small chance they have enough pump spells to save it, and then that would have been pretty awkward. Okay, so now Synthesizer, and then next turn we can Braided Net to trigger it. Or if we find a land, cast a Battlefront. Found a land and another Battlefront, but I don't want to keep Battlefront on top when I already have 2 in hand, because it's not a card we can hit with another Battlefront, so we would be decreasing our odds of finding something juicy. A Lightning Strike end of turn puts us to 14. And now a Slick Shot, that one's scarier. And a Bolt Wave. So we're at 7. So yeah, we need a good Battlefront. Or I can play Braided Net. But we're pretty likely to find something that answers Slick Shots. Saw Blades would do it. Another Braided Net would do it. There's the Perilous Snare as well. And the Star Cage would also clean up. So I think we've got high enough odds that I should still go for the higher upside play. So we found another Synthesizer and then Braided Net. So the ground is stable and Braided Net can tap Slick Shot. And then do I need another land? Not necessarily. Alright, just gotta remember to activate Braided Net. Wasn't gonna bother stationing because I want my blockers back in case they've got more haste creatures. But we could have technically gotten this all the way to 12 by just tapping 2 creatures down. And then next turn this could have made even more mana. But yeah, we should be fine if we just survive this turn. A card like Screaming Nemesis could also be worth tapping down, since we don't want it dealing 7 to us if we block it, so then it would be guaranteed 3 damage going through. Alright, now we can tap down the Slick Shot. And then we should be capable to present lethal next turn, even through a blocker or 2. Can play another net, just tap down the Percussionist and another creature. Alright, Bolt Wave puts us to 4. So at most they can have another 3 damage burn spell. Could also play the Briggs to gain 2 life, but yeah, I think we pretty much guarantee a lethal with a Perilous Snare on Percussionist. This only triggers when it's destroyed and not when it's exiled, otherwise I could have tapped it down. Opponent's going to shock their own Percussionist, but can't imagine that the Percussionist finds something useful here. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a functional hand, not super exciting, but Repurposing Bay with various 2-mana artifacts we can sacrifice will give us access to whatever we need. Don't need to prioritize an extra land when the Bricks can find it. Opponent blue-white with an Anchorage. Could be the mirror match. Could be blue-white control. Alright, so if we assume blue-white control, I don't really want to get my Repurposing Bay countered necessarily, but they would need to have a No More Lies pretty much. If we wait another turn and they keep up mana, they could have 3 steps ahead as well. If we are playing the mirror match, however, if I play Bay, it is exposed to Perilous Snare, whereas if we wait, we can maybe activate it right away. So maybe it is still worth it to run out a Braided Net first. That resolves. And the Saw Blades end of turn, so it is the mirror match. Braided Net doesn't really stop Synthesizer, but it can tap down Repurposing Bay in their upkeep when they can't quite activate it yet. So this turn, I think I still wait on my own Repurposing Bay and just go second Braided Net tap land. And then make sure to tap down the Bay. For mana means potentially a United Battlefront, which could be bad for me. Alright, opponent's just going to pass a turn, maybe activating Fountain Port. Star Cage doesn't seem needed right now. So yeah, can play the Bay and then get my first Synthesizer. And then the Scry 2 can look for more threats. And Unite the Battlefront is perfect. So make sure to put the upkeep stop again. Do we want Relic? I guess I can play Relic and then still Battlefront, but then I don't have the mana to activate a Repurposing Bay, which I might want to. So I don't think I keep the Relic. Even though it wouldn't be a terrible hit off Battlefront as something to sacrifice. So Fountain Port makes a fish. Tap down Repurposing Bay again. And we'll see what happens. Maybe our opponent is playing Ultima in their deck to somehow win the mirror match, but that would be surprising. Their own Braided Nets. I can tap down with my Braided Nets, so they can't tap down my Repurposing Bay. We're having fun. And yeah, opponent scoops it up, so pretty weird mirror match, but we were close to turning the corner next turn with Battlefront, and then assuming we make a few tokens of Synthesizer, we can also start leveling up our Windswept Bastion, which is pretty good in the mirror match once you start copying your Synthesizers, and then with Repurposing Bay we can eventually get the Fire Crystal as well to maybe get the game over with. Alright, so we got to see this blue-white artifact deck in action. Blue-white with an asterisk, small splash for the Fire Crystal, even though we're very rarely gonna actually cast it, as it requires double red. But it is still a valuable card to have access to for those control matchups where giving haste to your team is important, otherwise your creatures keep getting swept up. So I've been pretty happy with Fire Crystal, even though it can be awkward if you do end up drawing it. But yeah, the deck seems quite powerful. The additions from Edge of Eternities push the deck to new heights, even though the mana base has taken a hit, losing some of the dual lands, but that can only improve once we get Hallowed Fountain, presumably in a future standard expansion. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.